Generation Adventist Reflections. Now, to discuss character building ideas, here is your host, Dr. Danzie.
Hi family, welcome back to the Adventist Reflections podcast. It's really exciting again to be here with you, and again it's really exciting to have Catalina with us. I would like to share with you a quote, and it says this. It's from the Thoughts from the Mounds of Blessing. The heart of man is by nature a dark and unloving type. Whenever one manifests a spirit of mercy and forgiveness, he does it not of himself, but through the influence of the divine spirit moving upon his heart. So here's the thing. This week's lesson points about the mercy and the justice of God, and how this can work in our everyday activities, and how we could potentially build strong societies if we were to reflect that. But as we read in that quote, it doesn't sound like it comes naturally easy for us. So today we're going to be exploring the oppressed, becoming the oppressor, God's mercy, and God's justice as per the lesson. This is lesson 4. But I would like to ask Catalina first, before we go into any of these. How you going, Catalina?
I'm doing well. Away from home still, but we're near the end.
Yeah, you do look like you're away from home, and it makes a difference, doesn't it? I wonder if we were to have the same perception about heaven, if we will feel more soft and homesick. Okay, well, hopefully you'll go back soon. I hear you're going back soon.
I am.
So I wanted to revisit the challenge that we had last week, and there's something that came to my mind as I reviewed that, your challenge. You know, we revisit what the Sabbath meant for us, and we spoke about that. But I mentioned that I personally felt that there was the second part of what you challenged us with, as to how we could align the Sabbath more with God's intentions. And I thought about it, and I realized that there are things that I used to do and that I don't do anymore. One of the things was before I moved here to Ginger, and I think it might have to do with the fact of the distances and living in the country. But before, when I was living in a town, city, I would visit more people from church. It was a lot easier. Now, I don't intend to do that, but that's something that came to my mind. And the reason why I don't intend to do that is because in our church, most people stay for potluck. And for those of you who do not know our church, come along, wherever you are in the world. If you ever come to Australia, come to Gingin in Queensland. And we will always, every single time, have a potluck lunch without a miss. So it's very easy, not the same, admittedly, that going home, but it's very easy to catch up and even pray for somebody. I mean, it's not hard to go out of the church and have a private conversation with somebody somewhere at the back and have a pray with them. But one of the things that I do recall as well, that I do intend to do, is that we used to embrace nature more on Sabbath days. We used to go for walks. It could be the botanical garden, a mountain in Rockhampton, different places, go to Yeppoon and on the coast. And we haven't done that here. And I wonder if it is because now we feel, well, we live in the country, we kind of like in nature anyhow, and sometimes we appreciate that and desensitize. But I think there are ways to be able to do that, even at home or outside of home. But I'm proposing myself that I will go for a nature walk once a month. I think that's pretty doable in my life with my 3 girls. And I think prioritize that, because I have invested a lot more priority in everything else that I do, and that includes church stuff. So that's it. So it's a challenge. It will be a challenge for me, to be honest, to do that, but I'm up to take that. Have you thought of anything yourself, Catalina, or you didn't have the time?
So with the walk, I've decided, I mean, this is before, that I wanted to go into Bargara once a month.
Okay.
And take the girls to the beach.
Okay.
Because we're so close. We're really close to the beach, and there's a lovely walk at Bargara, even at Elliott Head. So we had sort of decided that once a month we were going to make the effort and go to Bargara on a Sabbath afternoon. So I really think that we need to make the most of it, because otherwise, we really have no excuse. We'll go into Bundaberg to buy groceries and to get our errands done. Once a month is realistic for going to the beach and just going for a walk. But one thing that I did decide for myself is for Sabbath, not so much visitations, just because I already see a lot of people, but I did want to try and be more intentional about contacting people on Sabbath. Just sending them a happy Sabbath text, or like we did with the original challenge, just touching base with someone who I don't usually touch base with.
Yeah.
So I want to give you an update on my challenge from last week, where you asked us to send a text message to someone.
Oh, okay. There's an update.
Yes, I sent the text message to my friend. There wasn't really too much conversation, but the next day she messaged me and she's like, hey, so I have something to tell you, but it'd be best that we talk on the phone. And in my head, I'm like, okay, worst case scenario, she's sick or she's pregnant. They were the two things that I thought she was going to tell me. Anyway, long story short, she tells me that she's actually left her husband. So they're not Adventists. They do have, she has a Christian faith. She has a bad experience from the youth group that she used to go to in Melbourne, a Pentecostal church, and there was a bad experience. And so she left that and pretty much turned her back on church and God for a little bit. But anyway, we connected. There was, we'd always have a spiritual conversation one way or another. She always knew that I would go to church, and she knew that I'm very active. So anyway, so at the end of this conversation, she's like, well, you know what? Now that I don't have the pressure from my husband about not being able to go to church, she's like, I'm going to go back to that youth group. I'm going to go back to that church and just see how it is. She's like, I just feel like there is this need for me to connect back with God. And I've wanted to do it for many years, but because of my husband, I haven't been able to. So that was really good. So we had a really good spiritual conversation, and then I was able to pray with her that, she continues to look for ways that she can connect with God again. And also I let her, not to have high expectations, because churches can let people down. And if we have high expectations, we sometimes, that sometimes ends up being a barrier between us connecting with God again. So, so I thought I'd give you that update, because it did ending up being something very spiritual.
That's awesome.
Really encouraging.
That's amazing. And I highly suspect that she will consider you to be a quiet, religious person, somebody spiritually minded, and she might have made that connection too when she's in this part where that text message might have said, hey, you've been thinking about this, the Holy Spirit's impressing you, connect with your friend who actually is a churchgoer. That's amazing. Wow. And
even when I said to her, because I'm like, I've been meaning to message you for like a week. And this was prior to your challenge. So when you put the challenge up, I'm like, okay, God, I really need to message her. So when I messaged her, she's like, I can't believe you would message me right now when I really needed someone to just talk to whenever. I was like, God, your timing's always so perfect. But we could have missed that opportunity if we didn't walk with faith and act on that impression. We could have missed a really good spiritual moment with that person. So I'm glad. I've done it when those people pop into your head, because that's what it's there for.
Excellent. Oh, that was exciting.
The Lord.
Well, I'm looking forward to more challenges and more of those practical things. And I would like to encourage those who listen and watch that the challenges hopefully are not just a one-off, but a continuity. That, like Catalina said, if you get some impression of contacting somebody, don't miss the opportunity. Nice. All right. So the lesson is mercy and justice. So just as a very quick recap, we've been, progressing through the idea that God created us. People forgot about him. They became slaves. Then God delivered them from slavery. He had to remind them of these principles. We already talked about that. And with those principles, also the Sabbath, the day of rest, to remember who he was and who we are. He's God. He created us. He redeemed us, and we are created to his image. And he also brought us out of bondage from sin. But eventually, people forgot again the commandments. We somehow tend to do that. And so God somehow impressed. The Holy Spirit came upon men and women to appoint them as judges over the people. And he always had some prophet there as well to point them back to the right direction. And these judges and prophets were there to say what was right, and to deliver and demonstrate God's mercy and kindness. I was listening to your podcast. For those of you who this is the first time you connect with us, Catalina runs the Connected Adventist podcast, as well as the Adventist Committed to Serve initiative. You find both of those on Facebook and the podcast on all the major podcasting avenues. But I was listening to your podcast this week with Kyle Morrison. Yesterday, actually, I was driving to work, and I was thinking of the lesson straight away, because we're thinking about justice and mercy, and this idea came of those judges that, were fearless. And I'm thinking, Daniel, you're definitely not there. Like, I wouldn't be the guy who will run to do nothing. I will be the guy.
So where me and Kyle felt the same way.
I'm a coward.
Yeah, I'm honest. Yeah.
I did martial arts, but I think they resonated with me. I haven't done that for ages. I did it in my teen years for years. And I always liked the idea that the guy who will teach us will say, remember, the first thing that you need to do is run away. You only use it if you're really cornered. I'm like, yeah, that suits me well. I don't want to fight to nobody. And I never did. I never have. My first strategy will be running, and now my sport is running. So there you go.
I was just going to say, hence why you can do marathon.
Yeah.
I'm going to run from you for the next 42 kilometers.
Yeah, that's right. Catch me if you can. So yeah, but people appointed, judges over the people to try to create some kind of sense of justice and mercy and deliverance. And then the people were not satisfied, right? They didn't like it. And so they asked, we want kings because everybody else have a king. And so they appointed Saul, and he messed up. He went away from God's desires. He forgot his given law, his blueprint, if you want to call it. The Bible says he started to basically oppress the people, inflict on them taxes, and he didn't really care if you were poor or rich. And so God then brings another guy. And if you're familiar with the stories, you will know it's David. If you're not, well, King David, which is probably one of the most known Israelite kings, even amongst the Jewish people today. And what interests me here is that he sets up an expectation, Catalina. And we see this expectation in Psalm 101. And basically, he says in this psalm, I am going to do what's right. I'm going to set things right. I'm going to be delivering God's justice. And he kind of sets himself as the Avenger of God's people, He sets himself as the superhero. Now, the question is, do you think that he succeeded? Do you think that he was that righteous and merciful guy all the time?
Not all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, look, at the end of the day, his intentions were really good. I think in the position and the season, as they say, where he was when he took on that position as king, I think he was spiritually in a really good place. And that's why he was so zealous to fight for God's cause. Mm-hmm. But as I'm sure we've all experienced, there are seasons in our spirituality when we are really strong, and there are seasons where we are really weak. And I believe that if we have a look at David's experience, and probably what is more well known in a bad sense is with what happened with Bathsheba.
Right.
And clearly there was no justice with the whole experience that happened there. So I think we have to be really sensitive to the fact that as we have a look at the examples of people's lives in the Bible, there are periods where they were really on fire, they were really committed, they were really vocal about how they're going to stand and represent everything that God is, but then they had moments of weakness and moments where their faith crumbled. And I think we have to be very aware of that in how it relates to us personally. Let no man think he can stand lest he falls, kind of thing. Because I think sometimes when we're at our most confident in our faith, it is sometimes what follows is moments of where we realize, you know what, I'm just a weak, sinful human.
Yeah, it's true. We a lot of the times have perhaps some good intentions. I mean, even with practical things in life. Maybe a lot of bodybuilders are listening to this, but who doesn't set up goals to go to the gym? And we are not like the bodybuilders who go every single day and kind of work out 5-6 hours a day, and they eat strictly and all this kind of stuff. I'm not a bodybuilder. And even though I'm a runner, at least last Sunday when I run that marathon proves that I'm pretty bad at keeping with training. So we set up really good goals, And but sometimes we fall, right? And the same thing happens with moral and spiritual things in the sense of service as well. But this is the thing. If we don't set up a goal, if we don't have a desire with that good, you mentioned the word intention, then we probably will never do anything either in that direction. So maybe a good point is, hey, you know, he did messed up, but at least he was striving. He was trying to do the best. He was desiring to deliver God's mercy and justice to his people because he saw the oppression and he didn't want to do the wrong thing. Like Kyle, if you don't know what we're talking about, just go and listen to Catalina's podcast. What is it called?
Stop in the Name of Morality.
That's right. Stop in the Name of Morality. Go and check it out and then check everything else that she has in there. But like Kyle, you know, he's setting up his good intention. You know, next time I see somebody walking out of the stores with bags, stealing stuff and nobody's stopping it, I'm not going to touch them, but I'm going to rip the bag so that everything falls and they cannot steal it. And so the intention is there, right? And our mind works that way. You know, we know that when we repeat things in our mind, there's this saying, you know, repetition deepens the impression of the mind. So what that means is that as we rehearse things in our mind, it's more likely that we'll act on that based on that than if we just don't have any clue or we don't have an idea of how we're going to do things. So yeah. And that song that David wrote, he's saying, you know, I'm going to do all this stuff. And I think that's a good start. I think before we started recording, I was mentioning to Catalina about something else. And I was saying, our girls, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And Matthew 26:41, I think it says that. And God knows that and he acknowledges that. And henceforth, he sends his Holy Spirit to work with us. If we didn't need the Holy Spirit, that means we already made it there. And I think we will always need God's presence in our lives.
And just I think the important thing about that aspect, about, you know, that we're willing, like it's the motives. I think that's when God says, you know what, I know your heart. I know the deepest longing of your heart is to flee from that, is to not have that, is to not partake of that. But he's also very understanding in the fact that, but I know you're weak and at times you will fall and you will succumb to whatever it is. And that's why I think where it's really important is where our heart is. And that's what God looks at. And we can be like the Pharisees and do a lot of outward stuff, but if the inside is what the bulk of the growth of sin is occurring, then that's what God's like, you know, like this is saying, check your heart. Check your heart and see that's what God looks at. And at the end of the day, it's our motives and our intentions and the sincerity of us to not want to partake of certain things because we know it's harmful. Yeah. So.
That's what the Bible says. David is a man after God's own heart. So his motives were he had good intentions, but in moments of weakness he just fell. But God knew who he was and he rescued him. And when you just said that, this idea came about the disciples in my mind, and Judas came in my mind. His motives were wrong. And I was thinking, yeah, just like Judas. But then I thought, hang on, the motives of the other disciples were wrong too. And God still had mercy on them and grace and delivered them, except Judas didn't listen to all these words of deliverance and exhortation. Because when you think about it, the other disciples also wanted to have a position of authority in the kingdom they thought he was going to set up. So we're talking about David, but we're talking about this idea of justice and mercy and how he wrote things in the book of Psalms. And so does Solomon in the book of Proverbs. As we think about these topics, I would like us to unpack a little bit of the idea of God's mercy. What really is God's mercy? Do we own it? Do we deserve it? When I was looking at the Bible dictionary, and the Bible dictionary says the words compassion for the miserable. When I think of me, I honestly, perhaps it's my pride, but I will hate to think that somebody's been merciful on me based on that definition. Because I tend to think that I don't want to be miserable. Or I tend to believe that I don't look at myself miserable. And that probably is a problem of the heart. But when I think about that's at the superficial level, but when I think about the spiritual level, I do think about how miserable I can be and I am without God. Is there anything that comes to your mind when we think about God's mercy in the sense of what he does for us in our lives? And what really is his mercy all about? Why is the Bible referring to mercy when thinking about compassion for the miserable?
I think I'm done with this world. It's full of pain. It's full of suffering. With the last ordeal that we had with our daughter being sick, I can guarantee you, I was like, God, if she gets sick, I'm like, I have peace that I will see her once again. So I think when we understand that God's mercy is there in the sense that he understands that we are in a world that is just very painful, and the experiences that we have are very painful. And for him to provide an alternative for us, and it's for every single person. I think mercy and grace, I think that they're very closely connected. So I feel that when God is merciful, he is understanding and compassionate of the condition that we're in.
Right.
He's compassionate on the fact that we are in a sinful world.
Right.
And in that, he says, you know what? I'm still going to be there for you, and I still will provide some sort of deliverance. I will still provide for you in many ways to alleviate the condition of the sin. But then also I'm going to get rid of it, and I have provided something else for you. Just hold on. Just hang in there until you can see that day. So I think that for me, that's where I see God's mercy, and the fact that, you know what?
Yeah,
I can still see his hand in amongst the filth of this world.
When I thought about that, more and more as I continue to go in this life, I realized that this is irrelevant, but I tend to do lists of things. I was thinking about that the other day here at home because I'm here alone at the moment. And I think, what are the things that I can change whilst my girls are away? I have a tendency that if I had opportunity, the time and whatever else to organize things, and I like them very autistically set up and meticulously in line. And anyhow, when I started with my shed, all the tools were by size, by order, by functionality, and that kind of stuff. So like, I'm going to throw a lot of things and I'm going to put these things. So I tend to do lists because I think that's how I accomplish sometimes things. And I don't do them all the time, but I see that I function a lot well like that. And when I thought about God's mercy, I thought, well, I'm going to make a list of where do I see God's mercy in my life. And I just started with very simple things. And I said, well, to start, I am alive. That's a good thing. And I'm not thinking only a life of, hey, I was conceived and I live. But when I think also about the people who have died, who have betrayed God, who did something unsacred, who unknowingly or whatever, in the Bible, I think I should be dead a long time ago by him. And,
yes.
And I couldn't say, oh, you're a wicked God. I said, you're right. I deserved it. So I am thankful. I think his mercy, I am miserable, and I think he's merciful with that. Then I put number 2, he has sent various people through my life to minister to me, to remind me who he is. And that's the reason why I'm in church today, really. So a lot of people who he has worked with ministered to me. And I think that's part of his mercy, and other people showing mercy through him as well. Number 3 is I have the privilege, and I think it is a privilege in this world, to have shelter, food, to have clothing. And I was wondering about that aspect because I'm thinking, does that mean God is not merciful over those people who don't?
Yes.
So I'm cautiously saying this, and I say it's a blessing, but I don't think that those who don't have God's blessing. And then last one that I thought, I have a reasonably functional family. I think that's a blessing too. And again, does that mean God's mercy is not on those who don't have a reasonable functional family or a family at all? Do you have any thoughts in there for you in your mind right now?
We have had a bit of a thought with that, but only because, you have illness in your family, but with Chloe's eye, so Chloe had a turned eye, and her eye turned at the age of 2, nearly 3. And trust me, I was like, God, why our family? Why didn't why didn't someone else's child have a turned eye? Because, there is a bit of background in family for having that condition. But in my selfishness, I'm like, why do none of the rest of our, nieces and nephews have that? Why is it our child?
Okay.
So there was this aspect of why us? And as we sort of process that whole thing, I think that we have to understand that there is a journey for everyone.
Mm.
And our journeys will be different. And it's not because God's mercy is less or more, but it's because that is the journey that God needs to take us in order for us to truly find him, lean on him, depend on him. And it's very hard for us to really, it's very unfair. I'll give you an example with my girls.
Yeah.
I can give everything to them on a silver platter, and I can dress them, bathe them. I can do a lot of things, but the journey that they're going to have as adults will be dependent on how I bring them up now. So as a parent, there are things where okay, you're old enough to dress yourself now. You're old enough to feed yourself. You're old enough to get this and to pick that up. So in order for me to mold their characters to be where I, as a mother, feel would be the best or would be the ideal for them to thrive as adults, there are certain things that I am doing now that for them may seem really unfair. I'm sure they would love for me to clean up their room every day, but I'm trying to teach them and discipline them so that they understand that there is value in you taking ownership to tidying up your own room. And thankfully they have. They really enjoy tidying up their room now. So I think that that's the best way that I can explain it. There are aspects of our life that God would want to use for us to draw closer to him. And the things that come into my life will be different to what come into your life and to come into the listener's life. But unless we can trust God's hand, we are always going to see it as him being unjust. We will see it as that is not fair. And the more that we compare our lives to someone else's lives, we really understand that, you know what, let me just take the lot that has been given to me and let me just depend on God and accept it and trust him. Because at the end of the day, he's going to show me why that had to be the way that it is. Why I'm not in a third world country living homeless on the streets and begging for money, I don't know. Why is that person? I believe it's a result of sin. However, that's part of the journey that God can use to help draw them closer to him through that dependence. Where I'll never have to, with Chloe's sickness, I can tell you my prayers and my gratitude for help has just changed. Like now, people say, oh, thank you for giving us a day of life and thank you for help. Well, after Chloe's health scare, I am so thankful for health. I think that it really shapes our journey and it shapes our dependence on God. And I believe that a lot of the times the people that have the least have such a greater dependence on God and such a stronger faith than what I will ever have because I am in such a fluffy little cushion.
It places things into perspective, doesn't it? And you know how I mentioned the definition of mercy is that, receiving something because we're miserable. And we all have some miseries in some, even though I don't, like I mentioned, I don't like to think that I am. We all have that. And it is because of those little things that happen, even in our little fluffy cushion lives, or when we don't have them like that, that we can, as you mentioned, see the dependence of God. As you were talking about that, I just thought about Paul, speaking in Romans 7, "O wretched man that I am." He was speaking of his spiritual condition. But then the thought came to my mind about, in I think 2 Corinthians, he mentions the idea that for this thing I besought the Lord thrice. So for this ailment, for this something, scholars have debated what is it. Was it a physical thing, a spiritual thing? I think it was physical. He's praying for God's deliverance 3 times, and yet God never took it from him. And then he says, and this is here, so I remember that I can glorify in God and God alone, and hope in him and have faith. It's a lot harder, and yet it's ironically easier in the sense of retaining it, to have faith when you don't see things in your misery. Okay, now I think we're already leading to that, but does God's mercy then only falls on the people who don't have much? So when we think about what David was talking about, he was talking about delivering people who were oppressed by the previous government, if you want to call it. Does God's mercy comes on the oppressor as well as the oppressed? Does God's mercy falls on the person who is doing something to take away from those who are oppressed? What do you think?
It says that the rain falls on the just and the unjust.
Okay, yeah.
So for me to really validate God's character, I know when it comes to my parenting, there are definitely moments where I do not demonstrate God's goodness. I'm not very merciful. But then there are moments where I am. And I can see that there is a sympathy, there is a compassion for your children, regardless of whether they are in the right or the wrong. So I feel that definitely that God does put his mercy on all of his creation. Whether it is visible to them as an act of God, that might be the difference. But also I believe that in addition to that, God will use people to demonstrate his mercy on us.
And I mean, we already talked about the idea that David wasn't all right all the time, but he still had the right motives. God still showed mercy. He didn't kill him. I was just talking about Paul and, how he say, how rich man I am. But before he wrote and spoke all these words, he wasn't merciful himself towards those people who were following Christ. He was indeed killing them and supporting the killing and traveling literally hundreds of kilometers to kill. And God showed mercy on him because we still have an opportunity to change those motives. And Paul, I don't know if Paul is a good example, because when I think of Paul, I think he did what he thought was right at the time. He literally didn't know better. He thought, these guys need to be killed because they are an abomination to the temple or whatever. But having this idea of, okay, I agree, actually, it falls on the oppressed and the oppressor. Does that mean that it will last forever? We have in Psalm 136 is another psalm that comes in the lesson, and it says that it talks about God's mercy. And it says, your mercy is everlasting. Your mercy is going to be there forever. Will we be spared forever? The oppressed will say I hope it does, because, without you, I can't. And that's the way I feel with my sinful life. But will the mercy of God will be on the oppressed forever? Which means, will the oppressed be oppressed forever?
Well, I mean, that's where the lesson then comes in with justice.
Okay.
And until we've experienced injustice, we may not fight for justice, if that makes sense. I think once you've experienced the injustice of humanity, the injustice of this world, it is then when you desire justice. So I think that when we understand, some people are a little, they don't really like the idea of God being just, in that he will ultimately, decide on the fate and the eternity of those that the Bible says are wicked, who have rejected Christ and have nothing. They desire to not have anything to do with him. I think they struggle with that. But I think we need to understand that in order for God's character to be just, in that he will come through with his promises of giving eternity to those who have chosen to accept the gift of eternity. In order for him to really complete and fulfill that promise in its fullness, he then has to also allow the fact that there are people who did not want that. It did not want eternity, and as a result, that's fine. That was their decision. That was not God's decision. The Bible tells us that he is seeking that everyone accepts eternity and doesn't want anyone to perish. But at the end of the day, the reality is that some just do not want it, and then that's okay. That's their choice. So in order for us to understand God's justice in its fullness, when we look at it in the light of eternity, then we must accept it in the light of this earth and of this life as well. There's going to come a point where God will be just with those who have lived in this life in a way that has not been in accordance to what his divine plan is.
When I think of what you just said, the idea of it is part of God's plan to deliver those who are suffering and oppressed, but it is also a plan of God's to be able to give a chance, which is what you said earlier. So aren't you glad that I'm not God? Because I think God has a tough job of having a balance. When I think of this, I think of a bit of a seesaw, I don't know, you ever tried to step on one in the middle, as a kid, I used to do that and try to balance them both. And it's tough. You never can get it in the middle. And even if you balance something, sometimes it kind of goes a bit on a slant. But God has the tough job of having it right centered so that everything is in the right weight balance. Because that's the only way that justice and mercy will be delivered. Talking about those motives of the heart, he is the only one who knows and who will be able to deliver a verdict on everybody who has done good and bad and be merciful and just themselves. I mentioned, I think, as we concluded last week's podcast, on the idea that Revelation presents God as the lamb that was slain, and that represents God's mercy. He died for us, and henceforth, we have mercy, and we we are, God the Father is holding back to, just say, I'm just gonna erase the whole race of humanity and just recreate some good stuff. He said, like, hang on, I'll pay for them. And I don't want to put a picture of the Father as being somebody who is, just wants to get rid of us, but rather it's because of our own good. We're just killing each other. We're diseasing each other. We are oppressing each other. Like, I love them so much. I don't want to see them doing any more of that. And just says, look, yeah, I know, but there's some people out there who are not wanting to do that. Their motives are right. Hold on. I'm going to come. I'm going to die. I'm going to pay for their debt. And they're going to be freed from that bondage of sin. And yet we have Jesus, the same one who is the lamb that was just slain in Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5, as the one who is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And when I think of a lion, I don't know what you think, but I don't think of a lamb. I think of somebody who's going to come and eat the lamb, and somebody who is roaring, somebody, and I know we usually have the perception of, because Peter says, Satan is like a roaring lion who is seeking who he might devour, but Jesus is the lion who is coming to avenge those people. So for the oppressed, having a lion on your side, it's like a good thing. Right? If I'm the one who is oppressed, I want this lion who is friend of mine, who also saved me, to go and avenge me, because, I've been afflicted by, too much tax, or being kicked, punched, domestically violated, sexually assaulted, because I've been exploded in some sweat factory in my work because they're not giving me the revenue I should get, whatever, something. And so for us, really, having a lion who is going to defend us is an exciting avenue. And that's where God's mercy is combined. And I think it's a lovely picture in my mind, at least in the imagery that we see from God. However, Psalm 146, which is referred to in our pamphlet, talks about God's justice. And the way the writer is portraying this is as if it's already here. So he speaks, just justice is here. He's speaking in present tense. And look, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so I'm not going to presume that I know what I'm talking about here. But rather, it interests me to see that he's speaking as if he's already watching God's justice being done. Do you have any thoughts about that? Do you know why somebody will say, when I think about justice and I think of all these people and I think of things that have been done in my life as well that I don't think are very just, like you mentioned with disease, how can we see God's justice today? Do I have to wait for Jesus Christ to come to see his justice? I guess. But what do you think, Catalina?
When I spoke about the justice initially, I sort of presented the aspect of maybe the negative, which is that justice will be demonstrated to those who have chosen to reject Christ, those who have chosen to live a life that has been harmful and sinful and that has affected the lives of many in a negative way. But we also have to remember that in justice, there is also the positive side of justice, which is the demonstration of sympathy and care. Justice also means that those who are deserving of more than what they have received, that they will get that. And in order for us to really understand, as you gave the idea of the lion and the visionary, just a visual idea of the lion, that we are here to stand up for those as well. The lion is like, the most powerful animal that you can find, in the environment that the lion finds itself. So they are there to defend and protect everyone. There is no one stronger than the lion. They can literally take down any animal. And for us to understand that we are those representatives, we are like little lions in this world, here to stand up for those who are weaker. We are the ones that, because of the infilling of the Holy Spirit, we can literally go out and just defend and protect those who are weaker than us. And weaker than us, I mean in the sense of, for whatever reason, whether they are physically weaker than us, due to their social environments weaker than us, or even spiritually weaker than us, people that maybe have not accepted the gospel, maybe people that have they don't have a deep walk with God to understand everything that they are able to do through the power of the Holy Spirit. So I see us as lions in this world, here to help those that are oppressed, here to take on that calling that God has given us to be able to demonstrate justice and to bring God's justice to this world, in the sense that, hey, this is unfair what is happening to you. but we are going to alleviate the consequence of the condition that you find yourself in as a result of sin, as a result of other people's actions, and even if it is as a result of your own your own choices.
For sure.
We are here to demonstrate that mercy and justice.
Yeah. So it could be a spiritual, delivering the gospel, or it could also be physical. And the book of Proverbs talks about this idea of those physicalities as well and how God's justice is delivered. So I think you're right. So God does justice and he utilizes us to deliver that justice even today. Now, here's a bit of a challenging question. At least it was challenging for me as I thought of this, as I reflected on this idea. Have you ever been in a position where you say, it serves him or her right? It serves her right. They got what they deserve. Because the book of Proverbs talks about this God's justice, and he makes reference to cause and effect. He says, some people reap what they sow, and some people work get what they worked for. And this is not the case for all, but a lot of the times that's what happened. I mean, some people say, I didn't ask for me to be raped or violated or cheated on or whatever. But some people got into an environment when they shouldn't have been, and unfortunately, the people they hang around were not the nicest of people, or they got into a bad dealing, or they whatever. We do that all the time, and we get into situations. It could be a financial strife. It could be a relational breakdown, and you think, they got what they deserve. Have you ever thought of that? Like, how can I go and deliver justice to somebody who, think of the prisoner. We talk about the idea of, visiting the widow or the prisoner and all that kind of stuff. God says, visit the one in jail. But hey, a lot of people who are there, maybe I think there are some innocents, but a lot of them committed a crime. And you say, well, you violated someone else's right. God says, visit this guy, but they are where they should be. Why should I go and visit them? Why should I deliver justice to any of these people? Have you thought of that?
Yes, I have.
And what do you think? How do you resolve that?
I think it's really hard. I mean, for those who work with community work and for those who help in providing different services. So we have a food pantry at our church. And I know that we have had, meetings and discussions and just certain things, just planning for the food bank, for the food pantry. And, there always comes this idea of, but, are people taking advantage of the services? And, I always am like, yeah, there are. And it's very hard because you don't want to tell people, hey, you know what, based on what I'm observing, I feel like you don't really need this. I don't feel like this is really something that, you should be using. But at the end of the day, I think when we're trying to reflect God's mercy and God's justice and his grace,
right, you
want to be long-suffering when it comes to situations like that.
Yes.
Now, does that mean that we're really unwise and we're just super naive about it? No. Through our food pantry, there's different things that we have implemented to help avoid those situations. And as a result, unfortunately, maybe other people could benefit more from the services, but as a result of trying to put in these measures to avoid people taking advantage of it, everyone has to just comply with those things that we have implemented. So we have to be wise. And I'll give you an example. So there were some people that we knew and they had a drug addiction problem. And, they were like, oh, we don't have money for rent or we don't have money for that. So we lent them some money at different times and whatever. And it just got to a point where we're like, okay, sorry, but we can't lend you any more money because we realized that it wasn't just the rent money. Like they're just running out of money, full stop, because they had a drug addiction. So we got to a point where we had to say, look, we're sorry, but, we've already lent you a sufficient amount of money. And until you can help to pay that back, we don't really feel comfortable giving more money for you. So, we had to just get to a point where we're just like, you know what, we just can't. But, initially we were very giving and we didn't want to be judgmental and we didn't want to be like trying to work out what their intentions or their motives were. But with time, you were able to see what they were. So I think, there comes a point where we are able to just say no. But at the same time, we just always have to remember, like, if God was to be in our position, God is so good. He just keeps on giving. It does come a point where if we continually make a decision that we don't want to follow in God's, perfect plan, then that's our decision. And unfortunately, there's consequences that come with that.
Yeah.
But I think our job more than anything is to be there for people and to be there for people in a way that does reflect Christ. And we just have to pray about it to be able to discern when that's enough and maybe they are just taking advantage of us, or where, we've definitely helped and assisted and they have felt that they have received love in whatever way that looked like.
Great. I think you answered the question that I had in my mind, which is, can we separate God's justice from his mercy? And I think we already talked about that balance. And the answer is that we can't. We just can't separate God's mercy from his justice. And you're right. There is a lot of times you could query. And in reality, is if we were to query everybody else's hearts and motives, we will definitely do absolutely zero ministering to those in need. Because we will always wonder, do they deserve it? I don't know. I don't know the story in the background. Maybe they are where they should be, deserve to be. But God's mercy is, remembering that definition from Easton Bible Dictionary, it's compassion to the miserable. And you mentioned something so important, that mercy and grace are intermingled together in the same aspect of God's character. And by default, this is something we don't deserve. And so God calls us to minister to people who don't deserve it. That's the reality. And so if you're ever wondering in your practical aspects in your life, if you should go out and deliver something to somebody who doesn't deserve, it could be your enemy. That's really what God is all about. It doesn't come easy though. So I think we need to rely on God because like Paul says, we are wretched people. We have these wrong motives a lot of the times. I know I do. And I had to pray a lot and rely on him. And honestly, I have heard God's voice, but I never had those experiences where God audibly talks to me in my mind like some people do. It's very, very sparingly when I have really strong impressions. But God does strongly impress me through his word. He already delivered what I need to hear in my mind. And by always referring back to the Bible, I can then realize that I need to deliver that justice and that mercy to other people. And perhaps be brave sometimes, but a lot of times get out of my comfort zone, bypassing my thought about somebody or whether they deserve it or not. Do you have any remarks before we go into our weekly encourager, our weekly example?
No. I mean, the only thing I would add to that is the justice bit.
Go ahead.
Only because I think sometimes as Christians, we give a lot and as a result, we get stung many times. At least that has worked out for me.
Okay.
Especially just with the people that I've worked with, they're very broken. Right. So I do believe that in also providing justice and being merciful to people. And like you said, if you feel they don't deserve it, then that's probably someone you should minister to. I really believe that we also have to just keep in mind to set boundaries. And people will only take advantage of us if we allow them to. So just be conscious of that when you are ministering to people. And, if you're starting to feel like maybe they are just taking advantage of your kindness, or whatever it is that you're doing, just to, step back for a little bit, really pray about it, really assess what your help is going to add to that situation, and then just allow God to move on your spirit. I mean, for this particular person that we were helping out, giving them more money wasn't going to fix anything. We were just enabling them to have more money to buy drugs. So we just have to be really conscious. And every situation is different. We've had situations where that has worked out really positive. And yes, we did lend money to people. And yes, we did let people in our house and it sort of backfired and whatever, that kind of thing. So assess each situation individually, pray about it a lot, but still be smart, still be wise. Because sometimes there are people that are literally just looking for the next person to be able to get what they need from. So just keep that in mind as well, so that doesn't end up being just enabling someone to continue in a behavior that is actually harmful to them and that will then be harmful to you.
Yeah, I agree. And, I would like to also say that there might be people who are listening to us who are aware of their condition, who are aware that they're miserable. Some of you might be listening. You might have been oppressed, or you are oppressed. You might have been cheated on, violated, raped. You might be going through hunger of some kind. I want you to know that I'm hoping that God will send somebody for you to see his mercy and his justice. But I want to remember something. Revelation chapter 6 verses 9 and 10 talks about a seal, and it's talking about people who have died for God. And as these verses tell us about these people, it says that these voices are crying out loud in the throne of God, saying, when, oh Lord, holy and true, when are you going to judge and avenge our blood on them who are dwelling on earth? These are people who literally passed because of God's cause. So maybe you were not cheated, violated, raped, hungered because of God's cause. But I want to assure you that God listens to you too. And maybe you are not seeing his mercy and justice right here, but his mercy and justice will come and will cover you and will deliver you from that suffering, that turmoil that you're having. And so I pray that you too might experience that justice that God can give you and his mercy that you can have even today. So make a commitment for God and be delivered emotionally, mentally, psychologically. And I know that you will live in peace, regardless of the difficulties. All right, Catalina, as we're finishing this episode, thank you again for the remarks. And now I would like us to think about our encouragement. An Adventist committed to serve. Who, where, what, and why? Do you have somebody for us today?
I do. So
Yes.
We're going local again. We're going back to Australia.
Nice.
So we have Mild End Community Church. So it is
Okay.
an Adventist church, but
Yeah.
they're called Mile, M-I-L-E, Mild End Community Church.
Right?
And they are on Facebook as well. So they had a really good initiative, and they were collecting blankets for winter.
Wow.
Which is similar to that what we shared in the, one of the other episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And it is their church pastor is Pastor Craig. So Pastor Craig has charge of children's ministry for the Greater Sydney Conference.
Okay.
And yeah, his church organized that, and they basically just went around to the community and just left bags or left flyers and letting them know that they were collecting blankets and winter clothing for homeless people, and that they were going to go and collect all their donations on a specific day. They went and collected all the donations, and then they did a food pantry as well. And then they opened up on a weekend for the community to come and collect blankets and
Right.
winter clothing as well as food.
Okay.
So yeah, that was a really good initiative, and they did it very well. Like that, in terms of their like marketing, they did a really good video, really good promotional video. They had banners, they had little bins that you could take your stuff and put it into. So yeah, they did it really well.
I
So,
love it.
Yeah.
Sounds like a really good initiative, and I'm sure that you can go into the Adventist Committed to Serve Facebook page. Now, I would like to challenge you. This is the challenge of the day, and I would like to encourage you to do something for the next 7 days. I would like you to daily write in a journal or a notes app one aspect of your life that shows God's mercy. Similar to what we just did here today. We talk about how we see God's mercy in our lives. So one a day, you'll come up with about 7 things by the end of the week. And number 2, write down one practical aspect of your life and your surroundings for which you wish God's justice to be done. It could be, for example, I wish that this homeless person will have food at least once a week or something like that. Whatever, write it down and pray about these aspects. It is my hope and my desire that by doing this, you will have an increase in the longing for embracing God's mercy and justice in your life, and have a desire to pass it on, because our Savior is coming soon, and all we can do is be like Him. We will catch you again next week, and we hope to hear from you about the blessings that you have received throughout the week, throughout the podcast, throughout your study and personal devotions. And remember to join us in a week's time, but also in our social media. We're on Instagram, on Facebook, Adventist Committed to Serve. You can also follow Catalina. We mentioned that on her podcast, the Connected Adventist. And where do we find your podcast, Catalina?
I'm on Facebook and Instagram.
Facebook and Instagram, and you're very active there. I know that.
Yeah.
And it's on Spotify.
Not as active as you though.
I've been a bit slack, but we'll come back. We'll come back energized. Until then, I am Dr. Danzie, and today I chose to love God and show gratitude in action for His mercy and for His justice. How about you? Remember to subscribe to this podcast, like it, share it, hashtag it, comment, and find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Tumblr as Adventist Reflections. God bless you.